There's a box sitting on my kitchen table right now, cream-colored, tied with a brown cord. My name written on top in handwriting I only saw one time before, on the inside of a book that arrived on my desk without a single explanation. I haven't opened it yet. I've been standing here in my kitchen, making my coffee, watching the morning light come through the window, and I keep looking at that box like it's going to tell me something before I'm ready to hear it. It won't. That was never how he operated. Robert Harlan Whitfield never gave you anything easy. Everything he gave you, you had to sit with. You had to let it open on its own time. And even when you finally understood it, you'd still be standing there with your hand over your mouth, wondering how a man could say so much without ever saying a single word. But let me start where it started. Let me start with the painting. I've worked at the Hargrove Cultural Museum in Charleston for 9 years. It's not the biggest museum in the South, but it holds things that matter: art, history, objects that carry memory in them, like water in cupped hands. I am the senior curator, have been since I was 31, and if you know anything about being a Black woman in that world, you know that every title you hold, somebody somewhere acts like you stumbled into it by accident. But that's a different story. On a Tuesday in late October, my director called me in and told me a private donor was coming to view a collection we were trying to acquire. Early 20th century American landscape paintings, several by Black artists the world had never properly credited. He told me the donor was important, told me to be professional, told me to wear something appropriate, which I ignored, because what I wear is always appropriate. At 2 o'clock, a black car pulled up. One man stepped out. He sent the driver away immediately, which already told me something. Men who arrive in black cars usually keep the driver close. The driver is part of the point. This man wanted no part of that. He walked in alone, silver-haired, lean, a face that had probably been handsome once and had settled into something quieter and more serious than handsome. He shook my hand, said it was nice to meet me, walked into the main gallery and stopped in front of a painting, and just stood there. The painting was called November, Alone. A woman standing at a tall window. Outside, gray sky, bare trees, nothing moving. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking out at something that wasn't there. Robert Whitfield stood in front of that painting for 11 minutes. I know because I checked my watch at minute 4, again at minute 8. By minute 10, I had stopped being irritated and started being genuinely unable to look away from him. At minute 11, without turning around, he said, "She's waiting for something she knows isn't coming." I didn't respond. I wanted to say, "That's not what I see." But I held it. I just stood beside him and looked at that same woman in that same window and felt something shift quietly in the room. That was the first time a rich man ever scared me, not because of what he had, but because of what he saw. 3 days after that visit, the museum received an anonymous donation, enough to keep us fully running for 4 years. The entire landscape collection, acquired, staff protected, restoration budget covered, my director told me privately. He looked at me in that careful way people do when they're trying to say something without saying it. I drove home that night with the radio off. Robert came back 3 weeks later, then again in November, then once before Christmas, always alone, always afternoons. Always asked if I specifically was available to walk him through the collection. We talked about Black painters left out of the formal record, about what Charleston carries, the way beauty and horror share the same air in this city, about silence in art, about what a painter chooses to leave out on purpose. We never talked about money, never talked about his life outside those walls. Then one morning there was an envelope on my desk, no card, just my name in that handwriting. Inside, a first edition book from 1947, essays on African American landscape artists, privately published, nearly impossible to find. Something I had mentioned once, in passing, during one of our walkthroughs. He had heard it, remembered it, found it. I called my friend Nina that night and told her everything. She listened and then she said, "Celeste, a rich white man keeps coming to see you specifically, and now he's tracking down rare books you mentioned one time? That is not about art." I told her she was being dramatic. She said she was being accurate. I told myself it was professional courtesy. I told myself a lot of things that year. I was good at that, finding the most reasonable explanation and climbing inside it, staying where it was safe and logical and didn't require me to want something I wasn't sure I could have. In February, the museum sent me to New Orleans for a cultural acquisitions conference. 4 days in the French Quarter. Thursday evening, I went down to the opening reception in my good earrings, and I was standing at the edge of the room when I saw him. Robert Whitfield. No conference badge, no group around him. Just standing near the far wall like he'd been there a while. He walked over and said good evening. I looked at him and said very carefully, "Robert, what are you doing here?" He said there was some business nearby. I said the conference was for museum professionals. He said he was aware. That was all the explanation I ever got. We spent 3 days walking that city like neither of us had anywhere else to be. The French Quarter in February is quieter than people expect, softer. We walked through the market, down side streets, past houses with wrought iron galleries, and history bleeding through every wall. We ate in small places where nobody knew us. He never made a show of paying. It was just done, quietly, before I could reach. One night in a small jazz club, candles on the tables, a quartet playing something slow in the corner. I said something ordinary, something about the music or the city. I don't even remember what. But it made him laugh. A real laugh. The surprised kind. And then he went very still. He was looking at me the way you look at something you are trying to memorize. Not uncomfortable, just complete. I felt seen in a way I didn't have a ready response for. I said, "What?" He opened his mouth. "Nothing. And then, nothing." He looked back at the band. I looked back at the band. I went to bed at 11. He stayed on the hotel balcony alone. I could see from the hallway window. I lay in the dark, completing his unfinished sentence in every direction I could think of. I've always done that. Collected the half-said things from people I care about and turned them over at night like stones, looking for what's underneath. Years later, I'd wonder what would have happened if I'd gone back out there and sat beside him and said, "Finish it. Whatever it is, just say it." But I was always too careful with men who couldn't finish their sentences. I told myself that was wisdom. I'm not entirely sure anymore. In April, he invited me to a gala in Houston, a children's literacy fundraiser his family had supported for 30 years. He said he thought I'd find it interesting, said it like he was offering me a brochure. I almost didn't go. I sat with it for days, and then called Aunt Delphine. She raised me from 12 when my mother left. She doesn't waste words on things that aren't worth saying. I told her the whole situation. She listened without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. Then she said, "Baby, go. Wear the green dress, and don't you shrink for nobody." So I went. The Whitfield estate was old money. Everything in it had been somewhere before, meant something before, had history that predated every person standing in those rooms. The gala was full of people who have never once wondered about anything material. I know how to move in rooms like that. But knowing how to move in a room and belonging in it are not the same thing. And that night, I felt the space between them more clearly than I usually let myself. When Robert and I walked in together, I felt the quiet, social recalibration. That small adjustment people make when something doesn't match their picture. I've felt it my whole life. I know exactly what it looks like. Brent Whitfield, Robert's son, found me within 30 minutes. Polished, expensive. A smile that only lived on the bottom half of his face. He said, "So you're the one who's been consulting for my father." The word consulting came out like a verdict. I looked at him evenly and said, "I'm the senior curator at the Hargrove Museum. Your father has been a generous supporter of our institution." He held eye contact one beat too long and walked away. Robert appeared at my left side, quietly. No rush, no scene, just there. And he stayed there. Every conversation we joined that night, he was beside me, not performing anything, just present. But when people asked about me, he said I was a colleague, a professional contact, nothing more. In the car back to the hotel, the silence between us had weight, had a shape you could almost touch. I said quietly, looking out the window, "You should have just said it," he said. Said what? I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. That was the night I truly understood what Robert Whitfield was. A man who would move mountains for you without a sound, and then let you stand in the dark wondering if any of it was real, wondering if you were real to him. In any way that counted. In June, he asked me to consult on an art installation for a small island he owned off the Georgia coast. I told myself that's what it was. I think he told himself that too. The island was extraordinary in a quiet way. Old live oaks, Spanish moss, a house simple for a man of his means, which still meant beautiful, just without any performance in it. We worked in the mornings. I reviewed proposals, walked the land, gave honest assessments. He listened completely, the way he always did. In the afternoons, we just existed there. He told me about his marriage, 21 years, respectful at the start and hollow long before the end. He said, I think we were both performing something we thought we were supposed to want. No self-pity, just fact. He told me about his father, 40 years of trying to earn something from a man who didn't know how to give it, getting the call that he was gone and standing in a Denver hotel room feeling not grief exactly, more like a door that had been locked for decades, now simply removed, the room behind it empty. I told him about Aunt Delphine, about being 12 and learning that love could be steady even when the people meant to give it to you couldn't manage it, about being first and only in every room for most of my career, about the specific weight of that, the way you armor yourself until you forget the armor is on. He listened to all of it. Nobody ever listened to all of it. Not like that. On the last night, we walked to the dock. Black still water, sky full of stars. We sat at the end with our feet near the water and said nothing for a long time. There was nothing that needed saying. That is a rare thing between two people. Then he reached over, and he held my hand, not dramatically, just quietly. His hand finding mine and staying there, like something decided. We sat like that for a long time. The water moved, the stars stayed. In the morning, we took the boat back. He helped with my bag, said he'd be in touch about the installation. I said that sounded good. We went separate directions. He never mentioned the dock. I never mentioned the dock. But that dock. Lord, that dock. I have gone back there 10,000 times in my mind. On ordinary Tuesday afternoons, on hard Sunday mornings, in every quiet moment that had enough space in it. And I still don't have a word for what happened there. I just know that no one has ever held my hand, like it was something they were afraid to lose. And I know I held his right back. 3 weeks after the island, Robert went quiet. No calls, no visits, no envelope on my desk, just silence. The specific silence of someone who is still there but has decided to be absent. I waited, then I stopped waiting. Because I am Delphine Monroe's niece, and I do not chase. I met someone else that fall, a kind man, present, uncomplicated. He told me I was beautiful on the second date and meant it simply, without any weight attached to it. I went to Nina's birthday dinner and laughed and made plans and moved through my days. 8 months passed. Then I got a call. Robert had a serious health event, his heart. He had recovered, but it had been close. I didn't call him. I almost did. 17 times I picked up the phone and put it back down. But I didn't know what I was anymore to him. And I refused to find out by calling a man in a hospital bed who had gone quiet on me, without explanation. What I did not know, what I am only telling you now because I found it out later, all at once, the way you find out about things that matter, is what Robert did during those 8 months of silence. He quietly funded a full renovation of the Hargrove Museum, the entire building, new climate systems for the collection, restored exhibition spaces, a proper archive room we had needed for years. The donor was listed as anonymous. The dedication read, "In honor of C. Monroe." He updated his will. He tried to write me a letter 14 times. His attorney told me this later. 14 drafts, none of them sent. I didn't know any of that. I was living my careful, armored life on one side of a silence, while he was on the other side of it, doing the only thing he knew how to do, loving me in the only language he had ever learned, which was the language of action, and never, ever, words. Robert Harlan Whitfield died 14 months later, not from the heart event. Quietly, in his sleep, at 61 years old. There was no drama in it, no final scene. He simply stopped. the way a river sometimes stops in drought. And you walk out one morning and the water's gone, and you stand there trying to understand where something that large could possibly go. I found out through my director, who received a formal letter from Robert's estate. The museum received a historic endowment, enough to operate and grow and hire and preserve for generations. It had been arranged long before he died, and I received something personally, the painting, November, alone. Crated and delivered to my apartment on a gray Wednesday morning by two men who handled it like it was breathing. With it, a letter, the only letter he ever sent. On heavy cream paper in that handwriting I would know anywhere. I'm not going to read you the whole letter. Some things belong to me. But I will tell you one part. Near the end he wrote, "You were never waiting. That's what I got wrong about you from the very beginning. I was the one who was waiting. I just never learned how to stop." I called Aunt Delphine. She came over that evening and we sat together in my living room with the painting leaning against the wall, still in its crate, still wrapped, because I couldn't open it yet. We sat with our tea and she looked at me and said, "Did he love you?" I looked at the crate, at that brown cord, at my name written on the outside. I said, "Yeah, I think he really did." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Did you love him?" I didn't answer out loud. She didn't push. She just reached over and put her hand on mine, and we sat there in the quiet, the way women who understand each other sit in the quiet, holding it together, not trying to fix it. The painting hangs in my bedroom now. Every morning I wake up and she's there, that woman at the window, standing in her warm ochres and deep browns, looking out at gray sky and bare trees, and nothing coming. Robert said she was waiting for something she knew wasn't coming. But I look at her, and I don't see waiting. I see a woman who is simply being, standing in her own light, in her own space, looking out at the world on her own terms, not desperate, not diminished, just present, just herself. I think Robert saw in her what he felt in himself, and I think when he looked at me standing beside that painting on the first day, he saw something different, something he didn't have a word for either. Two people who were both too careful, who both knew how to feel enormous things and keep them folded quietly inside, who sat on a dock in the dark holding hands over water, and then got up the next morning and pretended to be professional contacts. What we lost in all that carefulness, I can't calculate it. I don't try. What I hold instead is this. For a little while, I was the thing that made a very lonely man feel like the world had something left in it worth staying for. He never said it, but he spent years saying it in every other way he knew. And maybe, I think about this on slow mornings with my coffee, looking at that painting, maybe that's the saddest, most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Not the endowment, not the book, not even the painting, just the knowledge that I was loved, quietly, imperfectly, completely, by a man who never found the words. And if I'm being honest with myself, really honest, the way Aunt Delphine taught me to be, I never found them either.